Welcome everyone to Willio River Church. We're continuing our series in Judges. We're in the home stretch now. We've almost walked through the entirety of the book of Judges. Honestly, I think that is quite an accomplishment as a church for us to be in kind of the sunsets of this moment. Judges as a book takes place over the largest chunk of history that we see throughout all of the Bible. It's 450-year period of time, and we are now entering those final days of this season within the history of the Bible, the history of the world, and really just the history that we continue to learn from and understand and grow in. Judges has been a kind of this cycle that we have seen of sin and repentance and reconciliation and crying out to the Lord and then kind of falling right back into it. We just sang the song Prone to Wander, Lord, I Feel It, and that is like the definition of what Judges is about, is this idea that no matter how loving God is to us, our heart of hearts continually wants to pull away from him, and it's God that reminds us and brings us back to the heart of worship and the heart of who he is and what he has done for us time and time again. He never gives up on us. He continually pours his love out to us time and time again. And what like a gracious God that we serve, that even in the heart of darkness and these moment of Judges that we see, and really this next continuation is a big kind of monumental moment of that heart of darkness type mentality, that God in his graces continues to send us more than what we could ever ask for, both in a king and in himself. Right now, in our house, we're kind of finally hitting that place where we're needing to baby-proof things. This should have been done before now, but anyway, we're here. So we're baby-proofing things around our houses, and one of the annoying things that comes with that is these really annoying outlet covers that now get put in every joyous outlet. And if you know anything about me, I have far too much technology, and so because of that, there's constantly a trade-out of having to pry with your little fingers in order to pull those things out in order to make them useful again. So it feels like the house is half as useful as it once was, but that's okay. These things are good. They're protective of our daughter, but man, does she love to be inquisitive of them. It's like now that we have put these little safety protectors, they have drawn her eyes towards them all the more, and now she's trying to figure it out. And so sticking her little finger around where the plastic is and trying to get behind it to get to the good stuff, right? I think the reality is if she like understood the nature of what was behind there and like the danger that existed in those spaces, she would respond very differently to how she interacts with the core of it. And I think one of the big things when it comes to like our relationship with God, if we're to compare the two, is that the better we can understand the nature of who he is, the better we can understand how we're supposed to respond in light of who God is. I think it's like very similar kind of responses in those, where what happens is we have these expectations of how God works, and so we become inquisitive or we interact with him and we think we understand him, and so we get all close and want to, and then we realize, oh, there's power behind who he is, and so we take a step back and we try to figure out this relationship in this dynamic. The better we can understand in all things in life the nature of how things work, the better we can understand how we respond to those things. And I think God has done a really wonderful job in expressing the nature that we need to know of who he is. He expresses it time and time again, but often the problem is we in ourselves come to him and confront him with a missing of one of those pieces, one way or another in some form of that interaction. We respond to him like a kid to an outlet, not really knowing who he is behind him. 1 John 4:10-12, I think really summarizes one of the key importances to the nature of who God is and how we need to respond to him. Because I think the more we can stay in our Christian understanding and the more we dive into Scripture, the more we seek to obey him, we get into this mentality that there are so much that has to be done. And in that, our relationship with God can oftentimes feel burdensome. Where the reality is like God in his nature is not a nature of burden, it's a nature of freedom that comes from him. The very core of who he is all good things in life are poured out from the source of who he is, the electricity that is behind him. Yes, there's power and there's ways in which we need to respond with safekeeping and fear and response, but the beauty of what he provides is something far greater than we can ever understand. 1 John 4:10-12 says this. It says, "In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loves us, and he has sent his Son to be the propitiation of our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us." I think there's a beauty in the nature of God that we have to be reminded that the core of who he is love. And so everything he does that he pours out, the judgment that he pours out, the fear that can come alongside him, the response and the ask from us to take up our cross and follow him. All of those things are rooted in a loving God that is here with us throughout all time. I have this quote by a lady named Mildred Bangs Wincoop. And she, just to preface it, I don't agree with everything she says, but I think this quote is really, really good at speaking of the core of what I feel we need as reminders of who he is. And so this quote, here it says that love takes the harshness out of holiness, love takes the incredibility out of perfection, love takes the antinomialism out of faith, love takes the moralism out of obedience, love takes the Gnosticism out of cleansing, love takes the abstraction out of truth. But then we see what love puts. Love puts the person into truth. Love puts the ethical into holiness. Love puts process into life. Love puts urgency into crisis. Love puts seriousness into sin. And love puts fellowship into perfection. The core of who God is, if we understand the theology of one thing, it's that God is love, and without him, we can't understand the foundation of what that response looks like. This morning, we're going to read the story of a man named Micah, that if we get to the core of the issues here, is a man that really loves himself and is self-indulgent in his own ideas in relationship to God, instead of a freedom of self in response to a loving God that has been there obediently for him through all times. He highly values the ways in which he wants to work inside the system of who God is. So I'm going to start by reading chapter 17. We're going to cover a decent bit of text again this morning, 2 chapters, in order to see the fullness of Micah's story take place. So this is chapter 17, verses 1 through 13. It says this: There was a man of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse, and also spoke it in my ears, behold, the silver is with me. I took it. And his mother said, Blessed be my son by the Lord. And he restored the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. And his mother said, I dedicate the silver to the Lord from my hand for my son, to be carved an image and a metal image. Now, therefore, I will restore it to you. So when he restored the money to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith, who made it into a carved image and a metal image, and it was in the house of Micah. And then the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod of a household gods, and he ordained one of his sons who became the priest. In those days there was no king of Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. And the man departed from the town of Bethlehem in Judah to sojourn where he could find a place. And as he journeyed, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. And Micah said to him, Where do you come from? And so he said to them, I am a Levite of Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to sojourn where I may find a place. And so Micah said to him, Stay with me, and be to me a father and a priest, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, and a suit of clothes for your living. And the Levite went in. And the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. And so Micah ordained the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and he was in the house of Micah. And then Micah said, Now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as priest. And so if we're to take the ideas of kind of the story of Micah's situation, this is how it starts to unfold. Micah comes to see that his mother is praying out and actually pouring out a curse upon somebody that has stolen from their household. She has lost all the silver that she had so patiently gained and worked and was most likely inherited from generations of family up to this point in order for them to have this much silver. And now she is pouring out a curse, a literal curse on whoever was the one to steal this. And so Micah sees the response of his mom. He hears the workings of her in her room as she is pouring these curses out and wishing only the worst on the one that had stolen from him. And so out of fear, Micah responds in this moment to his mom. And so he comes to his mom, he looks at her, and he says, Mom, I am the one that you are cursing. I am the one that has stolen these goods. And like a good mom would do, she quickly encourages and supports her son and says, "Oh, blessed son, this curse was a sham. You know, I love you. You were my perfect son. And so because of this, I am quick to forgive you." And so what they do is they come up with this plan to get rid of the curse that has been brought upon them. So they say, well, if we take a portion of the silver and we like boil it down and melt it down into an idol and we place it in our house up to God, well, then maybe God will forgive us of this curse that I have put upon you and you can live in freedom. And so that's exactly what they do, is they take this false idol and they make this silver image and this metal image, this carved thing. They create an ephod. They take one of the rooms of their house and they make it into their own makeshift home temple. He then takes one of his own sons and he tells his son that he is going to become the priest of this temple in their home, all because of this one mistake that he made of stealing money from his own mother. And so now they have kind of continued to fall deeper and deeper into this situation. It even says that they do what is right in their own eyes. Again, we are reminded of this idea. I think this is such a key importance of the book of Judges and a key importance even into this day, which is that oftentimes we can have the right intentions behind our actions, but that doesn't mean our actions are the right actions in and of themselves. We can have good intentions behind what we want to do, but we don't check it with Scripture. We don't check it with our relationship with God. We don't seek after what He is asking upon us. And so what happens is now that they've got their home temple and their home worship and their situation of how things need to work, a Levite priest, which is one of the 12 tribes, and this specific tribe is not gifted land in Israel, and so their tribe is meant to disperse themselves among the other tribes in order to offer the priestly duties anywhere they go. So that's what's happening, is this Levite doesn't have a homeland. He's a nomad, and so he's traveling around looking for a place that he can call home to be a priest. And so it feels like perfect ordained timing for Micah, where he looks at this Levite and says, oh, well, perfect. We have our own home temple. We now need a priest to worship this, and my son is not the best fit for this. And so now he adopts this new Levite to be their priest. He offers him, again, a portion of this gold or this silver in order to keep the relationship going and keep this worship continuing to move forward. He even looks at it and responds and says, now that the Lord has brought this man to me, I know that he is going to prosper me. And so his response continues to build and build and build from this one single action that occurred earlier in his life. And I think if we were to take each of these pieces and parse them out, what we can see is the ways in which we need to be watchful of a misaligned personal faith. The story starts with a personal story of Micah before it kind of balloons out into a bigger perspective. And so if we are to look at our own lives and we're to reflect this morning and seek after what does God look like to us, how are we living a life to Him, how can we be watchful of how our actions can have good intentions but end up responding in the way that Micah responds. So the first of that is we start with confession. A misaligned personal faith starts when our confession is misaligned. The basis of all of our relationships with God comes from a very moment where the Spirit enters into our lives, where we recognize who we were previously, and we are told to shed our old life in order to live a new life in the newness of who Christ is. And that moment is the basis of a confession of recognition from who we are, who we were, and who we now get to be in the light of God. It's not a fear-mongering. It's not a response of out of guilt or shame. It's a response of freedom and love at the very nature of who God is. If we miss that part of the explanation of who God is, if we are out sharing the good news of Jesus and we do it out of a place of fear and not out of a place of love, what happens is we start that relationship on a misaligned direction that can lead towards a lot of poor implications. The key to this offering is the story of Micah, is that he is offering up this token as a response to his confession to his mother. And so he sees that his mother is putting a curse on him, which is the exact reason that he is needing to respond. It's not that he loves his mother. It's not that he loves God and he recognizes that what he was doing was selfish or had his own personal intent behind it. His response was, I am terrified that the rest of my life is going to be hard and harsh and difficult because of this curse that has been put upon me, and therefore I will do anything and everything to shed that of me. Because again, what he wants for his own life is self-indulgent. It's helpful to himself, whether that was the money that was provided. This money would have provided a great life for him, or whether it's the freedom from this curse, everything is focused on how can I make my life easier, better, and greater in this process. And so if God can be a part of that and he can make my life easier, then great, let's include him in the story. How different is this when someone comes to you and shares an actual wrong that has happened in their life out of love for you, not out of conviction or fear of shame? Like, one of the best ways we can look at these responses is when it comes to our relationship with parents, or if you have kids yourself. Like, how wonderful is it when your child recognizes a wrong that they've done and they want to respond out of love from that versus fear of punishment? It's exactly what we see happen. So often our relationship with God is based on this fear of punishment that can come, or repercussions that can occur in our lives. And so we respond saying, God, this was my last confession, and here I am coming to you. We see this in the Catholic faith very often, where confession is such a big moment that needs to be continually reciprocated time and time and time again in order for that rightness relationship with God to happen. That's exactly the kind of thing that Micah is doing here. He's feeling that if I made this mistake, I can make up for it through my response in confession. And I think that's a really dangerous place that we can find ourselves in when the foundation of our relationship to God is based on the fear of a repercussion that might come. The beauty of God is in his nature. He is loving, and therefore our response to him should be out of love. In a relationship with a spouse, when you can do something out of love for your spouse versus out of fear of the repercussions if you don't do that action, that relationship is so much healthier. If I do the dishes because I love my wife and I love our home and we want to contribute together in this versus my fear that if I don't do this and she comes home that she's frustrated at me, then that's the misaligning of how that relationship can work. In so many ways, it's about love for one another being the basis of those actions will always protect us. We must also be careful that when our confession does occur, that again is not the foundation of our relationship and expectation of God's interactions with us. There's this moment where Micah confesses to God and then believes, well, if we set this up, then God is going to respond to us in a good way. A real big fear that can happen in our lives is if we recognize something that we have done that is wrongdoing, and we respond to God and say, God, I'm here confessing this to you. Will you take this from me? And then our expectation is that life will get easier as a result of that confession. That is not a promise. Oftentimes, the response in the day-to-day can look a lot worse. There's repercussions that come from our willingness to be vulnerable and honest and share when we mess up. Real things can come from that. And so when we respond in those ways and life comes with devastation or challenge or difficulty, we can't look to God and curse him for the result of that situation. We look at him as loving for the freedom that he responds in that very way. I think of like my own testimony when it comes to my relationship with God. The reality was Tyler, before he was a believer, sought approval from anything and everything that could give it to him from a very, very early age. When I was a child, like my parents, whatever approval they could give to me, I would lie and do whatever I could in order to keep myself within approval of their status. And then as I got older, that led to relationships with others and with girls and wanting their approval in my life and the way that they looked upon me, like that was my world. It didn't matter anything else. It didn't hardly matter who they were. If they approved of me, that was great in my book. And then it became relationships with bosses and superiors and wanting their approval and wanting them to be proud of the work that I was putting out and what I was able to provide. In so many ways, God continued to remind me that these things were like fruitless, that none of them would be able to sustain me in my life. And so there becomes a part where the Spirit reveals himself to me to a point where I couldn't hold on to any of those approvals any longer. And then God in his love gave me an approval that will sustain me for all freedom. That is the beauty of a gospel relationship that is built upon love. That story is not me saying that I messed up and that I feared and was doomed because of my mess up. And so the way that I was conducting life, so I prayed to God because I was afraid he was going to judge me and send me to hell and send me to the dark places in this world forever. And so because of that fear of what my repercussions would be because of my actions, I prayed to God to ask him to remove me from that judgment. And then on the basis of that, I now have a relationship where I continue to try to do good and pour out good in order for God to keep me in his good graces. That's the reality of a lot of people's perspective of God. Because the church as a whole often wants to speak on the perspective of judgment and the need for change in order for us to understand the relationship with God. All of those things are true. There is judgment. There is hell. God will judge us for our actions. We do need to respond and change our ways in obedience to him. But what is the basis of that confession? Is the basis fear or is the basis love? That's what we're trying to get at here. When Micah's basis of everything that happens in his life starts with fear, we see the slow trickle into poor theology that leads to poor belief, that leads to poor obedience in his actions because he didn't truly know who God was that he was trying to worship. And so when a misaligned confession and a misaligned understanding of who he is, what happens is it leads us to a misaligned form of worship, which is what happens next. It's that our worship becomes misaligned. Micah then builds this idol. He sets up his own temple in his home. He dedicates his son to the role of priest, and he uses this as his primary connection to God. There's this one continual response that I see pop up in ministry and in life all over and over again. And it's that we as a society are really good at submitting our own opinions and our own desire into all things, versus laying down our predispositions in order to follow God in himself. That's what Micah does here. He creates this whole system. He says, well, this is how I'm going to worship God, and this is what works for me, and we have this money that we can dedicate, and so because of that, I'm going to use that as the basis for our relationship moving forward. And we kind of like the comfort of our temple just being in our home. I don't have to actually travel to make it to the temple walls themselves, and I don't have to be a part of these grand festivals and take time off of work. We've got it all here. We're good to go. Our family unit has this personal relationship with God. And because that personal worship is so strong, it prevents them from the beauty of the body and everything else that could come from it. And in every step, what ends up happening, even in the text, we see these little subtle moments where the author is showing us that his worship is to little g gods. It's not to God the Father, it's that he's created these little ephids, these idols, these pictures that have become the gods of his family, that have kept them in the comfort zone of their own space. The reality of Micah's story from here on out is it is radically stagnant. There's not big, major growth moments or beauty that comes from it. There's a stagnant form of worship that happens because of the comfort of the way that they have set their system up. Like I said, we as a society are really good at submitting our opinions when it comes to worship. I was just talking this week about the reality of different people in the church having different personalities. And like mine is one that is relatively extroverted, but we have a church that is relatively introverted. And so what a strange and interesting dichotomy that is when it comes to the expectations of how that plays out within people. There are things that God calls of me to do that are harder for me to do because my reality is I want to be with people, meeting with people, and responding to people. And so as a result of that, the personal side of things, the slowness of life, the ability to really be introspective and reflect on that relationship with God, all of that stuff is harder because the people want to consume for me. For other people, it's the very opposite. The act of evangelism feels like pulling your own toenails off, right? To like go to somebody that you know in your life and actually share who God is and be vulnerable and open up and respond out of personality and emotion and excitement and zeal. That feels really hard. It's far easier for me to just continue to know God and believe God myself and stick with the relationships that feel comfortable versus getting to know my neighbor for the pure fact of helping them understand the love of who God is. We look at this relationship in this very way where we continue to kind of toil away in these actions. One of the creativities of how God works is he calls us constantly to deny ourselves and take up our cross to follow him. For some, this is simply coming to church. For others, it's giving of your time or your money. For others, it's seeking time to know those around you. It might be singing in worship that does not feel like natural to you to come to a church and stand in a place where you never sing out loud any other time in your life outside of maybe the shower. Why would I do it here in front of other people who have to listen? There's so many different areas in which we're called to like let go of ourselves in order to respond in a way that God asks and desires of us. Prayer for many people can be a major challenge. If God is as holy as he is, how are we supposed to respond to him in a personal nature without it sounding fake or fabricated or anything like that? And then confession at the very center of it seems like something that is not meant to include other people in. For me, one of the hardest things that is asked is confrontation. It's something that my skin crawls at. Again, we see that the root of who I was before Christ is one that loved approval by all means. And so the idea of confronting somebody feels like the total antithesis of who I am in my very nature. But what God calls us to do is to continue to confront sin, confront evil, confront relationships that are misaligned. And so I try to do those as early in the week as possible so that I can be freed from everything else that can come with it. But the reality is oftentimes we can act like Micah and we can become extremely comfortable in our idea of worship. And I can do it on my own with my family that asks very little of me. It might cost some money, but that's a worthy trade for the lack of everything else that needs to come. And so we can say, God, I did this for you, and I set up this idol, and I prayed these ways, and I spent this money, and I did all of these things. But what happens is if we miss the heart of all of it, then we've misaligned the worship that we can have with God. Matthew 7:21 through 23 says this, "Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does this will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness." That's my fear in this response to Micah here, is that Micah has separated himself from all of God's commands, from his word, from his truth, from his body of believers, and he has siloed himself into this relationship that is based on a misaligned confession that has led to a complete disillusionment of their relationship that they get to have with God. One of the hard pieces of evangelism in the postmodern American world is that so many people have a response to God that is different from what the Bible calls of us. And so we as a church need to be the best we can to love people well and help them see and reveal, not out of fear-mongering, not out of guilt and shame, not out of frustration for the ways in which they're living, but out of love of a heart and devotion for how they could have a more enriched life with God. Which leads to the last thing, which is that our prosperity is misaligned. Verse 13 said, when Micah says this at the very end, he says, "Now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as priest." Our well-being, our prosperity, our life situation is not a direct correlation between us and God. If we look around us, there are far more people living prosperous lives that may attribute God to their empty faith. And there are so many people living extremely hard lives on the other side that desperately need God and the prosperity that he can provide in his very nature of hope. We sang again this morning, "Come thou fount," speaking of the prosperity that God reveals himself in his Spirit. We have all that we need. We have the greatest prospering in our lives that we could ever have. Anything else is just a bonus. That is God giving us his riches and his glory and his kindness that continues to pour out onto his people. But we have to be careful that when our worship or then our faith is based on the prosperity of what God provides, that's a dangerous act for us to land in. Because when hardship comes, where is the foundation of our faith? Christ should be the one we should turn to in hard times, in good times, and anything else in between. God has given us everything that we could ever have. But we do not need to respond and say, well, because God brought this to me, that means that things are good. And so then the story continues in chapter 18, and we see this personal faith of Micah now get adopted into the entire tribe of Dan. So one man's actions of one single sin that he did in his confession that led to his own temple now gets adopted into the greater church practice and perspective. That's the danger that can happen when sin is not brought to God in the proper light. Chapter 18 says this, and I'm going to read through it, and then we're going to have 3 quick points on the other side. It says this: "In those days there was no king of Israel, and in those days the tribe of the people of Dan were seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in. For until then, no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. So the people of Dan sent 5 able men from the whole number of their tribe, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, to spy out their land and to explore it. And they said to him, 'Go and explore the land.' And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. When they were in the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. And they turned aside and said to him, 'Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What is your business here?' And so he said to them, 'This is how Micah dealt with me. He has hired me, and I have become his priest.' And they said to him, 'Inquire of God, please, that we may know whether the journey on which we are setting out will succeed.' And the priest said to them, 'Go in peace. The journey on which you go is under the eye of the Lord.' So the 5 men departed and came to Laish and saw the people who were there, how they lived in security after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and unsuspecting, lacking nothing, that is in the earth and possessing wealth, and how they were far from the Sidonians and had no dwellings with anyone. And when they came to their brother at Zorah and Eshtaol, their brother said to them, "What do you report?" And they said, "Arise and let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good. And will you do nothing? Do not be slow to go to enter in and possess the land. As soon as you go, you will come to an unsuspecting people. The land is spacious, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is in earth." So 600 men of the tribe of Dan, armed with weapons of war, set out from Zorah to Eshtaol, and went up to a camp in Kereth Jearim in Judah, on the account that their place was called Manahath Dan. To this day, behold, it is the west of Kereth Jearim. And they passed on as they went to the hill country of Ephraim, and they came to the house of Micah. And then the 5 men who had gone to scout out the country of Laish said to their brothers, "Do you know that these houses, there are an ephod, household gods, a carved image, and a metal image? Now therefore consider what you will do." And so they turned aside there, and they came to the house of the young Levite at the home of Micah, and asked him about his welfare. Now the 600 men of the Danites, armed with their weapons of war, stood by the entrance of the gate. And the 5 men who had gone to scout out their land went up and entered and took the carved image, the ephod, the household gods, and the metal image, while the priest stood at the entrance of the gate with the 600 men armed with weapons of war. And when they went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, the household gods, and the metal image, and the priest, and said to them, "What are you doing?" And they said to him, "Keep quiet. Put your hand in your mouth and come with us, and be to us a father and a priest. It is better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or to be a priest to the tribe and clan of Israel." And so the priest's heart was glad. He took the ephod and the household gods and the carved image and went along with the people. So they turned and departed, putting the little ones and the livestock and the goods in front of them. When they had gone distance from the home of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house were called out, and they overtook the people of Dan. And they shouted, the people of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, "What is the matter with you that you come with such company?" And he said, "You take my gods that I make and the priest and go away. What have I left? How do you ask me what is the matter with you?" And the people of Dan said to him, "Do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows fall down upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household." And the people of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his home. But the people of Dan took what Micah had made, and the priests who belonged to them, and they came to Laish, to the people quiet and unsuspecting, and struck them with the edge of the sword, and burned the city with fire. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone, in the valley that belonged to Beth Rahab. Then they rebuilt the city and lived in it, and they named the city Dan, and after the name of Dan, their ancestor, who was born to Israel. But the name of the city was Laish at the first. And the people of Dan set up the carved image for themselves, and Jonathan, the son of Jerosham, son of Moses, and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up Micah's carved image that he made as long as the house of God was in Shiloh. So what we see happen here, and kind of a quick summary, is if we can think back to the very, very beginning of the book of Judges. At the very entrance, what happens is the people enter into the land, and they had divided Israel up into 12 or 11 pieces of Israel so that each tribe could have their own proper land. And so Dan was offered land up in the north country, but at the time, the Ammonites, the evil enemy at the beginning of Judges that we talked about, were living in that area. And so out of fear of their own life, they never took over the land that was due to them. And so now almost 400 years have passed, and the tribe of Dan is still hidden out in the wilderness of the mountains because they never fulfilled the actions that God had asked of them. And so they're getting tired and frustrated and overturned that now generations have happened, and they're still stuck in the very same place that they were at because their enemy that they never overtook is still in their land. And so what happens is the tribe of Dan sends out spies to an area of the world that seemed a lot easier to take over. And so they found this tribe that was of simple people with no threat and no real military, living off the land, having everything they needed, and they see this as an easy target. And so that's what the tribe of Dan does. Instead of going north, they go south of the Mediterranean Sea, and they adopt this new place that was not gifted to them by God, and call it their own tribe in their own place, rename it the tribe of Dan, and that's where they continue to live. Now with their own system and their own gods and their own ephod and their own metal image and carved image and wood image and everything else that they have now built into the structure of a place that was not previously given to them. So the last kind of 3 reminders I have for us is our relationship when it comes to the personal response to God is one that we saw in Micah's story, but now we can see what happens when those very same bases enter into the corporate structure, into the church itself. We see the exact same things follow through. One of the beauties that I have for our church right now, like in all honesty, is I think we're really good at preventing us from falling into this direction. Right now, our church, in all accordances, is on the foundations of simplicity. We try not to overcomplicate everything. We do 3 things as a church. We gather on Sundays, we gather in our missional communities, and we have Bible reading groups where we can hold each other accountable in the need to read the Word. And then we say all we are striving to do is know God better, believe God better, and obey Him a little bit better. That's our church. That is the whole model. That is everything we offer. And everything else in addition to that is just beauty and excess and just beneficial celebration. But outside of that, that is who we are as a church. I think those simplicities, if we keep the heart of worship at what it is meant to be, it protects us from so many misguided directions that can come in worship. The fear of corporate worship like this is what they have done is they've taken land that was not theirs. They have now set up a system and a temple and a church and everything else around it that was not actually based on who God is and what He asked of us. If we're careful and we just do the next bright and shiny thing and what's next and what's next and what's next, we can miss the actual heart behind what our relationship of faith looks like. So we see here that we have confession that is misaligned. This is something we need to be watchful of as a church, is when our confession as a church is misaligned. We have to start in the right place. Again, it's amazing and unique that that's where we are right now. Micah's false views in his relationship with God has now led to an entire tribe of turmoil. It's so easy to view the church as a ship that we all need to steer together in one single direction. The best ships that have, if you've ever studied naval academy at all or naval attacks in any way, the beauty of the Navy is that the whole team works together in order to make it possible. If you look back into olden times with wooden ships and how they used to travel, it was not just based on the captain steering the ship and making sure they all got to safety and everyone just chilled out on the boat like a cruise today. It was hard work, and everyone was invited into that activity together. And so the beauty of the church is when we act in this very same accordance, that when all of us can work together to properly keep the aligning in the right direction. It's not what do we do next and we need to add this on and pile this on top of that. It's how do we keep the heart and the root of what we do as a church continuing in that right direction. Sure, there might be a captain that is steering the ship, but there's equally the person sitting up in the eagle's nest looking for the land that is coming ahead. The beauty of the church is we have people that have to keep it clean and keep it working and everything when the tides of the ship start to move and slosh and cause us to course direction and we respond with an extreme action in one way. We have people that help guide us back into track. We're all in on this together. That's what I love about our church right now is I think it is ripe for growth in so many different ways because we're prepared for it in every aspect. Every one of our missional communities are in a place where they would love more people to come and be a part of it. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Sundays right now in all forms of worship, we would love for more kids to be in our kids ministry. We're now prepared for it. We would love for students to come to our church that we can invest in. We would love for people to come on Sunday mornings that would feel invited and could join in on so many different areas. The beauty of where this church is right now is we are ripe for that growth because of the simplicity and the direction in which things are in. That means that when, so 1 Corinthians 12, 15 through 26 says this. It says, the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And on those parts of the body that we think less honorable, we bestow the greatest honor, and our unpresentable parts are treated with greater modesty, which our more presentable parts do not require. But God has so composed the body, giving greater honor to the parts that it lacked in, that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. That is the beauty of where we are at, is we are all different parts. We have all different strengths and things that we can rely on one another in order for the church to continue to have an aligned faith with what God asks us. But when a misaligned confession leads to a misaligned worship, this can happen in the corporate body as well. We see the whole setup of Micah has now been adopted into this body, and so his way of worship has now flooded the scene. So God gave us his way of worship, and it really is a simple system. Back in the day, it was a temple that they had to travel to, and it was a priest who intersected with those people and even found ways to separate and ignore what God had offered. But now we have Christ, and so the reality is our simplicity of worship is purely built upon him. Like I shared, our discipleship strategy is to know, believe, and obey. That means we need to know God on a deeper level, which means that we commit to circles in our life that will help us grow in knowledge of him and see ways in which that will happen. But all of that is based on the love of God and our desire to love him more and know him better. Then we believe in God at a greater veracity. So we'll notice that your prayer life will become more enriched, and you'll feel the fruits of the Spirit enter into your lives more this year than it was last year. And we see the increase of those things time and time again continue on. And then obedience, where we'll see that we want to obey God more and more with every day. We want to share him more, that we want to give him more, that we want to serve him more, and we won't be able to get enough of it. If you think back to the woman at the well, what is Jesus' response in John to this woman? John 4:24 through 16 says this. This is what God says to the woman who is at the well that says, how do I follow you? How do I love you? How do I serve you? And he says this, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And the woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. And Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. That's the beauty of it. God has come to us in Christ, both in spirit and in truth. Let's pour into that as a church. That is the beauty of who we are as a church that is built upon two things: the Spirit of God that continues to guide, has continued to provide, and will continue to provide, and a truth that we will never steer away from. So one of the reasons we're reading through the book of Judges of all books is because even in a story like this, we can understand and see ways in which we need to live and respond in fullness of who he is, which leads us to the last thing, which is when our prosperity is misaligned. Church, God has been unbelievably faithful to be prosperous in all that he has provided for us. Our church is a collection of people that are here today because you feel and believe in that vision and want to serve God in this way. But the reality is we're 2 years into this church, and God has provided us a building that we get to continue to be out of. It's amazing. So many of my friends that are church planners right now are 4 or 5 years in still praying for a permanent space in which they can do ministry. God has been so prosperous to us in so many ways. He's provided the very stage that we stand on by a random team that came and served alongside us. I mean, how amazing is that? I knew nothing of this team before I get a random call by somebody that said they wanted to build a stage for us. God has been prosperous to us in so many ways. We prayed for children in our church, and everyone obeyed. I mean, God is so prosperous to provide the level and the amount of children that have come from that. Well, maybe not everyone, but most everyone obeyed. It's amazing. God has been so gifted to provide more and more and more than we could ever ask, think, or imagine. But our relationship with God, our church, is not built upon the prosperity of what he gives. It's built upon spirit and truth. That's the beauty and that's the reality. And that's something that we have to be careful to be protective of. I know this church will continue to grow. I know that God will continue to bless it, and it will pour out, and we will see more people come. But at the end of the day, we can't change who we are. We can't change our mission and our values of who we are just because we want to see change happen in one way. That's what Micah does, is he sees this confession, and then he creates his own system that works for him, and he sees good come from it. So many churches grow from techniques that are immoral. That has not been the cases of our church. It's beautiful that we can see the reality that God is going to bring two different people to this church. He's going to bring people that believe in the vision and want to do more in their lives and serve more. That's why most of you are here, because you think that this is a place that I can serve God and I can actually make a real impact. That's why I'm here. There's not a real other reason you would be here besides the fact that you believe in God and believe that together we can make a real impact and see a church continue to grow and thrive here in this community. And then the other side of it is people that just don't yet know him. And so we, as a church, get to go out and meet our neighbors and meet those that are just down the road from us, just waiting for somebody to come and share the beauty and the truth of us. God has put you in the place that you're at for that very cause and reason. Prosperity is something God has already provided in his Spirit and provided in his truth. That is not the foundation, the basis of who we are. But man, it's something we get to be ready for and expectant in who God is. I don't want us as a church to grow for wrong reasons. I actually pray that God protects us from growth in any area that is not saturated in discipleship and evangelism. I want our church to grow because God empowered us with the strength, the dignity, and the power to convict us every morning to share the radical love of Christ in the environments we are in. I don't want our church to grow because we were given a building and that is the basis of why we grew. I don't want us to grow because God sends the grandson of Moses. That's what happens in this passage is God sends this awesome person to now be one of the heads of their tribes. And so just because God sends awesome people here is not the basis of who we are. I pray God sends more awesome people because that helps. But the reality is we are going to grow because of discipleship and evangelism in a church that grabs a hold of that mission and vision. Just because God gives us money is not the basis of our growth. It is an obedience to our love of who he is. So as we take communion, as we recenter ourselves under these truths, I ask that you use this time to, one, just be encouraged. Truly be encouraged because we have a church that really does love God and builds ourselves upon that basis. But also use this as a time to course correct whatever misalignment you might have in that relationship. Whether it's a feeling that you need to do more, whether it's a lack of obedience in a certain way in which you think you could be doing more in, whether it's just a misunderstanding of his very nature and saying, man, I've been hard on myself and I continue to be hard on myself. God, would you fill me with your presence of your love this morning so that I don't continue to fight my own flesh and look poorly upon myself. God loves us. I was talking to Joe this morning about how he's made every star in the sky, he's made every beautiful thing in nature, but yet he loves us more than all of that. He calls us his favorite creation. That's amazing. That is the nature of a loving God. He doesn't look poorly upon us, so we should not look poorly upon ourselves. We have been freed from that flesh, and now we get to live in his spirit of truth and love. Hold fast to that. That's what you want to share with others, not a downtrodden faith, a faith that is loving and inspiring and has radically changed your life for the better. Be careful when our theology can make us feel so bad about ourselves that we forget the beauty of the freedom we have from feeling bad about ourselves. That is who God is in his core. So let's set up a church that is built upon what he is, not what we think he should be. Church, let's pray.